So you and I, we know each other for probably like 10 years ago. 10 years now, or if not, maybe more. And we met working together, mentoring young minority male students to prepare them for college. During that time, I discovered that you had a passion for firearms. Tell me about that and how it manifested.
Okay. Well, I would say that I think it was pretty much from like movies.
Okay.
I mean, when you think about it, I mean, my family is from the islands, and they they don't want you to do anything remotely with any guns or anything like that. So my mom didn't even want to buy me a Nerf gun. I remember my grandmother actually snuck and bought me a Nerf gun once. But it's kind of one of those things where like your parents are like, oh, like don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So like you're like, all right, well, I want to see what it's about. Obviously, there's YouTube. You see, you could go on and type in pretty much whatever you want and see, different guns. So I would say that's where it started from, kind of like being limited to it and thinking of it as in like, okay, this thing is like not a good thing. But through education and you watch the how-to videos and stuff like that on YouTube, you start to see that it's more than just a gun. It's more than just something that's negative. And then at that point, that's when you see all like the custom guns online. So
Yeah.
I'm like, that's cool. So that's really where it started from. There was no like experience that I had like as a kid that was like, oh, this is the trajectory of my passion for guns. It was just pretty much.
Cool. So I have, because it's been so long, I have small midgets of recollecting our time shooting together. One thing I could recall is that you were really selective after going through the process of choosing your first gun. Like you went and rented and rented and rented. Is that something that you did, whether it was out of like, if I'm going to make my first purchase, it's like my first car and it has to be a connection emotionally? Was it like, oh, it has to be practical? Or was it one of those things like, this gun is really popular, so let me just go with whatever is trending?
For me, I knew that, uh, if I'm being completely honest, I knew that like my first one it's probably going to be a while until I buy like a second one. So, I made sure that like if I'm going to spend the money, like I don't want to regret my purchase. You know what I mean? So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna. Actually, it was 9. I have a list of all of them on my phone.
The one
I
that
shot
you
9 before I bought my first gun, and it's so funny because the gun that I bought is not the gun that I initially thought I was gonna buy, which is the 43, the G43. Um, I just wanted to make sure that I was comfortable with one, obviously spending that amount of money, but two, I think I bought my gun 3 years ago, 4 years ago at this point. So one, spending that amount of money, but two, being comfortable in like the functionality and me, operating the firearm.
So one thing I picked up, because I remember it like it was yesterday, that part, you was fixated on the Beretta APX at the time.
I
The
still
Beretta,
am.
the Beretta had just came out, and I was like, one thing I teach during the class is that don't allow the media to dictate what your first purchase is.
Right.
Because just like a car, just because it's a Mercedes Benz, don't mean you were meant to be in a Mercedes Benz.
Right.
Um, you're 6'2", might not be the best to be in a two-door coupe.
Right.
I mean, even though you're a car fanatic as well. So now transitioning, your hands is massive, right? And in talking, yeah, your hands dwarf mine. Like you could swallow my hand with your hands. Another thing I always talk to students about, especially I remember time and time again putting guns in your hand, and there was guns that you were like, bro, I don't even feel comfortable touching it,
Yeah.
because when you like you grab this water and I grab this water, this water is gonna disappear, and for you to then go and get a 43, which is a very small gun,
So, yeah.
in your hands, how was that training and becoming familiar with something that initially may be very dwarfed in your hands?
I I don't know if you remember like in the entirety, but one of the things like that I was concerned about was my pinky hanging off, and everything. If it was a subcompact gun or just a compact gun, I wanted the little pinky extension on the magazine.
Yep.
And I remember you telling me telling me and showing me that that doesn't matter, because I was so concerned about it. Like our first couple of times going to the range after shooting, I'm like, all right, look, I don't feel like I have a good grip on the gun, and you're like, it really doesn't matter, and you're like, your pinky doesn't do anything. You're like, watch, let me show you. And then you went and you shot it. Your grouping was on point. You know what I mean? So I'm like, all right, well, maybe it doesn't matter. And at that point, that's when I started realizing that the more comfortable, I think that stemmed from the fact that I wasn't as comfortable as I could have been with shooting. And then when I got that confidence, it's like, all right, yeah, your pinky doesn't matter. You know, so Beretta APX, with the HK SVP 9 was one of the ones that I still love it too. I still want it. Those were kind of like the guns that I was looking at. I think the PQ-22.
Okay.
Different guns, but the reason why I gravitated more towards those guns is because, like you said, my hands are huge, and I wanted something that formed with my hands, that fit comfortable. But after shooting so many times, I shot 9 guns before I bought my first gun on my own. That was outside of going to the range with you. So at that point, I'm like, all right, I have a good grasp on this. Like, I think I know what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And then another thing, training with you was extremely fun. And the reason that it was fun is because you started to grasp the concept very quickly. So we went from doing very simple drills, loading, unloading.
Right.
And then I'm like, wow, all right, you're hitting consistently where I need you to hit. So I know that the fundamentals are there. Then I'm like, okay, let's do this. 2 here, 2 here, and 2 there. And then you started doing the drill. As a trainer, I wish every student has that type of evolution so quickly. Talk about that, and if anything, my recommendations, my advice as a trainer contributed to it, or if it's any outside contributing factor.
I would say I could tell you hands down the biggest thing that I learned from you, like the biggest thing, is trigger discipline. I laugh because like I remember like just being so bad with my discipline for the trigger, and you're like, stop screwing the trigger. Stop screwing the trigger. You're like, yo. Like,
and I probably said something else.
Yeah,
I get probably a little colorful with those words.
Yeah, you're like, you know. So I'm like, oh man. At one point, I mean, I don't, maybe not with other people, but at one point, like you kind of flicked my finger, and I was like, all right, I gotta remember this. That was like the biggest thing, that I would say, fundamental wise, that was like of help to me. I feel like, especially seeing all the videos that you post on Instagram, it's like some of these people, like their discipline is not there. So definitely discipline. So far as, you know, like going through the drills, yeah, I mean, I can't recall everything, but there's definitely pointers and tips that you gave me. You're like, you know, you're pulling the gun too much to the left, or you're pulling it too much to the right, or, you know, so far as how I'm holding it, you know, extend your arms, things like that, definitely help to improve the flow of everything that was going on. But if I was to say, like, if someone was to ask me on the street, I'm like, the biggest thing is you're going to learn discipline for the trigger.
Yeah, and the reason discipline for the trigger is two reasons. One is the most important trigger discipline is keeping your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot. So when I flick someone's finger, it's with the intent to hurt you, so that you build that, like that stimulus that know that, oh, this is going to cause pain. So the classic, yes, exactly.
Classical conditioning.
See, there you go.
Yeah,
bringing out the PhD. But then it's also what a lot of people do when I start to try to do more advanced training, is realizing that they're slapping the trigger. And they think that they're flinching, but they're not realizing that the trigger doesn't require that much force for the gun to go bang. And then you go like this, and if you're an untrained eye, it looks like the person is flinching. Right. There's a difference between squeezing the trigger too hard or slapping the trigger
Right.
versus flinching.
Right.
It's more of a you're dipping your hand versus you're
Right.
dipping that, and that's because those muscles relay.
Right.
So going through all of, especially I want to touch base quickly, coming up in a Caribbean household. I remember you were, and I hope she doesn't see this because I'm definitely going to say it, you were hiding the fact that you were into guns from your aunt who you were residing with at the time.
Right.
How was that experience of being in the closet? Because that's where I tell a lot of my students, I was in the closet gun fanatic, and because of the perception of my family, it was almost, I don't want to say equivalent to homosexuality because I won't say that for that magnitude because I know what they go through, but the fear of loving something
Right.
and not being able to share it and be your true self around those who care for you and who you care for.
Definitely it's just it's weird, right? Because like you think like, okay, like you're older, so like this is something that should be okay, like you're of the legal age, but it's like all those rules get thrown out the window pretty much. With my family. Well, I wouldn't say that because not everyone's like that. My sister, she is in the Army. She just got into guns. My stepdad's into guns. My uncle, my mom loves guns, but never wanted me to have guns. But it really, I think it was just more so of a personal thing of just not being familiar with firearms. I don't think my aunt has ever, shot a gun, held a gun, probably even like seen a gun in person. And if she has, it was probably a negative experience coming like, all my my aunts, my uncles, they're born in Jamaica, not in the best places. So their interaction with guns, I would assume that it wasn't as like constructive as like having someone who's an instructor bringing you to the range, showing you, working on your discipline stuff like that in that manner. So I think it was just a tricky time. I mean, there's not really much to it so far as changing her perspective or anything like that. I don't think I could ever do that. I think she's just gonna have to come around when she does. But even now, I'm just like, yeah, like I own guns.